Hi guys, this is Peter Rodner for the Mokdong branch. This is my C2 Alba Lesson 1 post vlog. So this was the first week of presentations. I hope everyone had an excellent class. Overall, my students did very well. I was very happy with all their presentations, and I'd just like to go over a few things that I implemented in my class that my students enjoyed and that worked really well. So in my original vlog, one of my suggestions were that if you could create some type of self-introduction or have students create some type of Cheongdam urban legend, it would be really fun and interesting for them. Personally, I decided to try to integrate my self-introduction along with the idea or concept of urban legends. Overall, all I did was I had a few media cards that I created on the first page, and students would have to answer questions about me, the urban legend Peter Rodner. Overall, my students really enjoyed doing this. I put in some really silly answers, but I asked them why this was maybe true or how this is maybe possible, and I started getting the idea of urban legends or stories that were memorable. Overall, this went really easily into our stimulus page, and my students were able to retain this information later on in their final presentations. So, in using the 2 pages of stimulus, I was really able to lead my students to their first personal project, which was where they just needed to think of another urban legend that they were aware of. Overall, using the media of fan death, most of my students were aware of this urban legend before. We did have a little bit of a debate whether or not this was true or whether or not this was false, but it was really a good idea in order to use and lead us into the personal project. When I asked my students to come up with their own urban legend, some of them had a little bit of difficulty, but once I phrased it into the idea that your parents many times will tell you stories that they want you to do something, and this story is either to scare you or to get you to do it, a lot of the students were able to come up with ideas very quickly. Some of the ones that I'd never heard of before was one that if you don't eat all your food, you'll go to hell, and then you have to eat all that food later on, and it's rotten and it's disgusting. Another interesting one that I never heard of was going to the bathroom with the door open. If you do this, it's kind of like your luck goes away. In all these cases, or all these urban legends, we're able to start kind of identifying why they're maybe a little bit more memorable. One of the things we also noticed were some themes. For example, a lot of these urban legends that my students were aware of were related to some type of luck. In addition to that, we were able to start explaining why or what behavior or who would want you to change this behavior. For example, we related it back to the fan death, and we started thinking of who would maybe start this urban legend or who would maybe want this to happen. Some of the ideas that my students started thinking of was maybe the air conditioning company. They want you to stop buying fans and buy more air conditioning. We also thought of maybe somebody who was maybe paying the bill for electricity. Maybe it was a mom or a dad, and they didn't want their children to have the fan on all night because that would waste some electricity. Overall, this went really well in the first personal project. So in my original vlog, I did state that there's a total of 3 concept context pages. And if you're running low on time due to the fact that your introductions went over, you should probably cut out the last page related to the tapping and listening story. The reason was I felt that the first 2 stories were a lot more effective in helping to understand the 3 concepts of an urban legend, being memorable, understandable, as well as changing behaviors. For the first story related to popcorn, my students were immediately able to really understand how having the number of cheeseburgers and french fries was a lot more memorable as well as understandable for them rather than just some numbers of calories. In addition to that, I was able to create a discussion asking them, well, is popcorn as popular in Korea as maybe in America? And maybe in order to make this more relevant to them, we should think of a different type of food that's also very unhealthy. In doing that, we discussed the idea of ramen and how unhealthy this is, and how it has a lot of MSG and salt in it. In order to help it describe or explain how much salt, we then started relating it to other foods. One of my students related it to some traditional Korean soups. In addition to that, we also said that maybe one ramen might be equal to upwards of 5 to even 100 French fries with the amount of salt that's in them. This really helped us also lead into the idea of the trick-or-treating story. When I asked my students who had ever heard of this urban legend, nobody had ever heard of it before. We discussed why it was maybe that they had never heard about it, but it was such a big thing in America. And obviously the holiday isn't as big in Korea as it is in America. So therefore we discussed other Korean holidays where maybe food or treats are shared or given out, and how that story could maybe be changed in order to relate more to the Korean culture. So overall, I was really happy with all the final presentations. A lot of my students were able to create their own urban legend or update an urban legend that they were already aware of. Some of the urban legends that I never knew about or I heard about were the idea that swallowing your gum is maybe deadly. Also going to sleep with your hair wet. I guess this is something that mothers tell their daughters that they'll go bald. And then a couple of my students also decided that they would create an urban legend on the creation of Cheongdam learning. Those were also really a lot of fun, and overall I was very happy with all my projects that my students created. So I hope these vlogs have helped you guys out, and I'll see you guys next class. Have a great term.